I tend to record my remote classes. All right, so required materials. The text is Employment and Labor Law by Sihon and Castagnera. Never tried to pronounce his name before. 9th edition. All right, so what are we going to study here? What's the content of this course? We're going to do an overview of the laws affecting employment, mostly the federal laws. Focus will be on the major federal laws that form the employment relationship between the employer and the employee. The course will discuss the Federal Labor Standards Act, the use of unemployment workers' compensation and Social Security as safety nets for the economy, workplace safety, employment contracts, employee privacy, discrimination in the workplace, disability, the global perspective of employment rights, and collective bargaining. And of course, collective bargaining could be a course in and of itself, which would be labor law. Nobody's asked me to teach that yet. Course goals were obtain a working familiarity with those things. Source of law, legal procedure, the Fair Labor Standards Act, Occupational Safety and Health Act, OSHA, unemployment systems of the states, workers' compensation policies, employment contracts, employment at will, employee privacy, the global perspective on employment, discrimination laws, that would be based on race, gender, religion, and age, rights of disabled workers, basically the Americans with Disabilities Act, and organized labor under the National Labor Relations Act. So those are the particular laws that we are going to look at and see how they affect employment. At the end of the course, you should be able to recognize legal issues as related to federal wage and hour. You should be able to explain the importance of unemployment compensation, the procedures involved for both the employer and the employee, workers' compensation insurance as a safety net for the economy. Students should be able to articulate the responsibility of the employer as to workplace safety, as well as the employees or employer's responsibility in identifying and dealing with discrimination in the workplace. The student will be able to recognize issues related to employee privacy and disability and articulate the global perspective of employment rights. So what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? Let's see, there'll be 3 interim tests and a final exam for the course. In addition, the students will be expected to prepare 5 short homework reports during the semester. Each short homework report will be 1 to 2 pages long. Each interim test will be worth 100 points, with the final worth 100 points for a total of 400 points. The homework reports will be worth 20 points each for a total of 100 points. That gives us 500 so far. To complete each homework assignment, the student will find a court case involving the area of employment law we were discussing at the time of the homework submission. The student should cite the case and discuss the facts and legal aspects of the case. Finally, the student shall give his or her opinion regarding the outcome. The report should be between 1 and 2 pages long. Attendance, you should come to class. That's really the big thing. Come to class. The school's got an attendance policy. I've got an attendance policy. Basically, let's just avoid all that. Just come to class. Excuse me. I'm required to take attendance on Moodle, and Moodle can be accessed by the administration of the school. And if you decide that coming to class is not something that you're interested in, eventually Greg Butcher, the Associate Dean for Student Affairs, will start hounding you about your attendance, and there's all kinds of bad things that can happen. So just come to class. Be here on time and enjoy the class. If you can't come, let me know you're not going to be here, so I can just, not that it's going to make any difference to me, but I'll just know that I'm not going to be expecting a full class. Homework assignments and such, when they are due, please get them turned in. And if you can get them turned in on time, that helps me a lot. Makes my job easier if I'm grading everything at once, as opposed to trying to get things that are sort of trickling into me. So get them done, get them on time. If you don't get them in on time, I'll probably still grade them, but I will probably dock you some points. I got stuff in here about if you can't access Moodle because everything's going to be submitted on Moodle, then email me the assignments, but then get IT to prove to me that your computer wasn't working. Basically, I just don't want you lying to me. Oh my God, I forgot to do that assignment. I know what I'll tell them is my computer's not working. I don't want it to come to that. I'd rather just trust everybody. Just get your stuff in on time. Here's how the grading will be for the semester. Tests 1, 2, 3, and final, each worth 100 points. Homework 5 at 20 points each for another 100 points. And attendance and participation, 50 points for a total available pointage of 550 points for the semester. The attendance and participation, I don't want it to be about attendance. I want it to be about participation. So although I'm required to take attendance, participate in class. Every time I've taught this class, it's been very much a give and take between me and the students, and it will be a lot of fun. I've enjoyed teaching this course, and I think people have enjoyed it from a couple of different points of view. The final exam will be administered according to the schedule. I know that they have posted the schedule, but when I put this syllabus together, it was kind of still in flux because of the way that they moved the beginning date of the semester. Accessibility. Thiel College has an accessibility resource center, which is available for your use if you have any kind of accessibility issues or need any kind of accommodation to make you to give you the opportunity to be successful in your studies here at Thiel College. We are more than happy to work with anybody to give you whatever additional help that you need to be successful. The only thing that we ask is that we do it according to the proper channels at the school. So that's the Accessibility Resource Center. And if you have any kind of disability or need any kind of accommodation, talk to the people at the Accessibility Resource Center. Most specifically, the person in charge of that department is a woman by the name of Erin Bain. Her phone number is there. Her email is there. Please start the ball rolling by contacting her. And then once you have everything set up through the school, they'll communicate your needs to me as the instructor, and I will do everything in my power to help you be successful. Here's the college's attendance policy. Like I said, if you don't come to class, eventually you'll have emails from Greg Butcher telling you about all the nasty things the school can do to you for not attending class. One of them would be that they could force you to just drop the class that you're not attending. And if you have an overall attendance issue with all of your classes, they could actually remove you from the school as a student. Once again, easiest thing here, just come to class. Academic Honor Code, this is found in the student handbook. You are to be honest with your work, no plagiarism, no cheating. Once again, the easiest answer here is just don't cheat. If I catch you cheating, then I've got to do something about it, which I don't want to do. Or I could just turn you over to the school and then it gets out of my hands, but usually that gets kind of messy. Guidelines for recording class content. You are not allowed to record class content. I'm allowed to record class content, so I'm going to. At least while we're remote, I'm planning on recording the classes and then posting them where you can get access to them. I don't know where that's going to be right now. I tried posting them on Moodle. Moodle does not allow me to post files that big. So it's a memory space issue with Moodle. What I've done in the past is I've made everybody my friend on Microsoft Teams, because Teams does allow me to put big files out there. So I'm going to determine the other choice is I could put everything out on YouTube. I'm not sure what I'm going to do just yet. I am recording, and by the end of the week, I'll figure out where I'm going to place them so that you'll have access to them. Excuse me. The next thing is the COVID response policy. We have no idea what's going to happen. COVID is continuing to rampage through the society that we live in, and I don't know what the future holds. The one thing that I do believe sincerely is that there's not enough political good faith in the world, at least in this country anymore, to ever allow people to completely shut the economy down again. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not going to make any comment, but I really don't think that we're going to see mass shutdowns or closings of things. I do think that we're going to be living in a world with COVID and living with it right next to us and trying to be careful with it. You know that the school has COVID policies that you have to follow, that I have to follow, as far as contact and wearing masks and things like that. Obviously, if you have to be quarantined or taken out of circulation for a while, we understand that. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this recording right now, because I'm expecting there'll be a lot of people that will come in and be put into quarantine almost immediately. One of the possible reactions that can happen in reaction to COVID is remote learning. I don't think we're going to have remote learning, that the school's going to close down. We're going to have nothing but remote learning. I don't think that's going to happen. But we do have the opportunity to go remote if it will make the delivery of the course easier. Obviously, that's what we're doing today, and that was as a result of what the school wanted to do about pushing the starting date back so that they could test everybody for COVID. In addition to that, now we had a big snow event that went through and made getting to the college even more difficult. So we're remote. Now, one further announcement on that. Many of you, like I said, I do recognize most of you and you've had me as a teacher before. I don't know how much I've told you about my personal life, but I have a son who has muscular dystrophy, and it's a serious medical condition that he has. And over the Christmas break, he has had some significant health issues. Started the week before Christmas, and basically he has been in the hospital since the week before Christmas to right now. I am not, although it looks like I'm sitting on a beach in Florida or something, I'm not. I'm sitting in a hotel room in Pittsburgh. I haven't been home for a month. And my son is in ICU at UPMC Presby right now. It's necessary for me to be here to take part in his medical care. He is moved down from critical. He was in critical condition for a couple of weeks. He's more stable at this point. Just call him serious, not critical. And eventually we're planning on him getting out of the hospital and all of us going home and going back to our regular lives. When that occurs, I'll be back on campus. This is not going to be a semester long thing, but I am going to be remote until my issues with my family are taken care of. So the invitation that you got for this class, I have it set up on Zoom as a continuing meeting, a repeating meeting. So it should be the same information, the same Zoom invitation to get into Thursday's class. Okay, so we will be remote for a short while here at the beginning of the semester. Continuing along, cell phone policy. If we were face-to-face in a classroom, I would be saying, you shouldn't have your cell phone. That's just disruptive. Turn them off, put them away. Don't bring them to class, whatever. I don't believe that. I don't believe that for 1 minute. You guys are probably all seniors. If not a senior, you're at least a junior. And my job is to help you to create a successful career for yourself. And I am not kidding when I tell you that I have had classes where a student of mine was called on his cell phone during the middle of one of my classes to receive the offer of employment for them to start their careers after they graduated. So you guys being seniors and juniors, if you're a junior, you may be looking for an internship that's going to set you up for your career. If you're a senior, you're waiting for that phone call that says that, yes, they want to offer you that job. If that phone call comes when you're in my class, I want you to answer it. So you can have your cell phones, put the ringer on vibrate so that you're not going to be disruptive to the rest of the class. When that phone call comes in, excuse yourself from class, go out and celebrate in the hallway, take the phone call, accept the job, and then come back in. But that's my cell phone policy. Tobacco policy, please don't use any tobacco. When I first did this, I wrote no smoking. So then I had a lot of people chewing tobacco in my class. That is just disgusting. So no tobacco at all. Teaching approach. I try to make the classroom a seminar approach as opposed to a lecture approach. It's harder to do a seminar approach when we're remote like this. I'm going to try my darndest to have that happen. But in reality, I like it to be a seminar approach. I want us all to be together working on these things at the same time. I want you to be putting in your 2 cents, what you think about something. I'm going to ask you what you know about certain things, and I'm going to ask your opinion about certain things, because a lot of what we've got going on in this class is going to be affecting you for the rest of your career. You know, if you're somebody who is specialized and wants to specialize in human resources work, then this is something that's going to be very important to your future. But even if you're not going to be an HR person, knowing what these laws are could help you be a better manager at your company. You're going to learn more if we have a give and take in the classroom, and that's always my goal, and we'll give that our best shot. Grading. I always like to point out that I put on here, all tests will be graded by the instructor in a timely fashion. What does that mean? I didn't tell you anything there. I'm a lawyer. I use weasel words all the time. I have a reputation for not getting your stuff back to you quickly. I have earned that reputation, but I will do my best to try and be better about getting your assignments graded in a more timely manner this semester. All right, so here's what I want to do this semester. An overview of the American legal system is where I want to start, and that basically is a discussion of the Constitution, statutes, and administrative law. And the first chapter that we're going to do in the book is going to be chapter 22, because that's the chapter on the Federal Labor Standards Act, the Wage and Hour Act, whatever. That's another one of its names. That's the big one out there. That's the law that really sets up everything else about the employer-employee relationship. Why they started at chapter 22 is beyond me. So I'm starting with chapter 22. Okay, that's the Federal Labor Standards Act, where we'll talk about the coverage, who is covered under that act. That's where minimum wage comes from. That's where overtime laws come from. That's where we define who are exempt employees, mean they're exempt from overtime rules. And we talk about child labor here. So we're going to talk about the history of it and how things are done now. Then we'll do chapter 21. Safety nets for the economy, and we're going to talk about unemployment. We're going to talk about workers' compensation. We're going to talk about Social Security, and we're going to talk about ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. So there's a lot of law here that we're going to talk about. The Social Security Act is a massive piece of legislation. ERISA is a massive piece of federal regulation. Workers' compensation and unemployment laws are state-driven laws. So we have smaller things at the beginning, unemployment and workers' comp, and then we have massive federal programs in Social Security and ERISA. Then we'll go to chapter 20. We're just sort of working backward in the book at this point, it looks like, huh? Chapter 20, Occupational Safety and Health Act, OSHA. Now, OSHA's been in the news a bit lately. Because of the attempt by President Biden to, by executive order, have OSHA take over and require COVID testing or COVID vaccination. there was a very recent, last several days, Supreme Court decision saying that that was an overstepping of power by the president, and OSHA will not be responsible for the enforcement of vaccination policies and whatnot by the federal government. But that's OSHA, policies and processes, citation, abatement, and appeal. After that, we'll have our first test. So it'll be on that particular piece of material. Then we'll start using the book a little bit more conventionally. We'll go to chapter 2 of the text, which is going to be employment contracts and wrongful discharge, where we'll talk about employment at will. We'll talk about wrongful discharge. We'll talk about employment contracts, and we'll talk about protections that are given to whistleblowers, people who turn their employer in for illegal or improper activities. Then we'll do chapter 4, employee privacy. Does an employee have privacy at the employer's place of business? Can the employer use surveillance to watch the employees? Can the employer monitor your computer use? What kind of employee privacy is there for your medical information? And believe it or not, your employer has a tremendous amount of your medical information, especially if they are sponsoring a health insurance program. And finally, what about your employment file, your file in HR? How much privacy are you entitled to there? Excuse me. Chapter 5, global perspective. We're going to talk about international workers' rights. We're going to talk about immigration, and we're going to talk about employer compliance with immigration rules, and specifically the IRCA. From out of that arose the I-9 form that you should all have seen at some point. If you've had any kind of a job, you should have had to fill out an I-9 form proving that you have the right to work in this country. At that point, we'll have the second test from the semester. Chapter 6 will be the next group of material. We'll start with chapter 6, equal employment and discrimination. That's the Civil Rights Act and race. We'll talk about the difference between disparate intent and disparate impact. We'll talk about the job requirements in discrimination. Am I allowed to discriminate ever? Well, I run a gym, a workout place, a spa, and I want to hire somebody to be a female locker room attendant. Am I allowed to say only females should apply? Can I discriminate if the job requires it? Or is it possible for that to happen? We'll talk about affirmative action and reverse discrimination. That's an interesting section because when you start discriminating, going in one direction or the other, it's still discrimination. So we do have some, call it moral issues with that. Then we'll do chapter 7, which is going to be gender discrimination. In general, in regards to pay, in regard to pregnancy. We'll talk about the Family Medical Leave Act at that point, and then we'll talk about sexual harassment. Some interesting concepts in this particular chapter. Then we'll do chapter 8, which is going to be religious discrimination. So we'll talk about what is religion. We'll talk about national origin. Now, national origin is its own discrimination category, but it's dropped here under religious discrimination because very often they are related. We'll talk about Title VII of the Equal Rights Act and how it's enforced. And we'll talk about the burden of proof. If you want to sue your employer for religious discrimination, how much proof is necessary? Then we'll do chapter 9, age discrimination. And we'll talk about the proper age Oh, excuse me. All of a sudden I get real tired. We'll talk about what age discriminate. At what age are you old, basically. We'll have the third test. Then we'll go to chapter 10. Disability, Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, is what everybody falls under now, but it wasn't the first act. There were other anti-discrimination acts with regard to disability prior to the ADA. We'll talk about them a little bit. We'll talk about what the definition of a disability is. We'll talk about what reasonable accommodations are, because you're not allowed to discriminate against somebody based on a disability if they would be able to do the job with reasonable accommodations. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about defenses to proposed violations of the ADA. Excuse me. Rehabilitation and drug testing, we'll talk about that also. Then we'll do chapter 11, miscellaneous other discrimination laws. We've got the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and 1870. We have Executive Order 11246. We have military service, we have constitutional protections, and we have state laws. Then we'll do chapter 12, the rise of organized labor and the regulatory framework. So we're going to talk about organized labor unions. Okay, so labor developments in America, the development of the Labor Relations Act, the National Labor Relations Act, and the National Labor Relations Board. There's some interesting history here. We get to look at a little bit of history and the violence and perceptions of organized labor at the beginning of the 19th century through today. Not the 19th century, 1900s. Chapter 13 of the text is next, the unionization process. So once you decide you want to unionize, you have to have an election. So we'll talk about that. Chapter 15, collective bargaining, the duty to bargain by both the employer and the representative of the employees, basically the union, and what types of things are the subject matter for bargaining. What things is the employer capable of just dictating, and what things have to be negotiated under the collective bargaining agreement. Then we'll do chapter 16, picketing and strikes. We'll talk about the healthcare industry. We'll talk about the Norris LaGuardia Act. And once again, we'll talk about the National Labor Relations Act. Picketing and striking can get kind of interesting. Are you allowed to? What are the limitations that are placed on your ability to do that? And then can you be replaced if you go on strike? And then we'll have our final exam. Somewhere in there, I will assign the various homework assignments. I don't have dates for them at this point, but that is the syllabus. I'm going to stop sharing now. Go back to you guys. Any questions? Okay. It's an interesting course, and I think you'll find it, I don't want to say exciting because I don't know I can go that far, but you'll find it interesting and hopefully enjoyable. Let's go with that. I did say that where I wanted to start with was what did I say? I said it right here. I said that I wanted to start with, oh, that is not the right thing. Give me a second. I'm sorry. An overview of the American legal system. Okay, so we should be able to complete that today and then start actually on some of the stuff in chapter 22 with the Federal Labor Standards Act. All right, so let's talk about the American legal system. On the outline, I've talked about the Constitution, statutes, and administrative law. Now, most of you have had me for business law already. If you haven't had me for business law already, then this is something you're going to hear, because I tend to go over this. I think it's important for everybody to understand the structure of the government, how it works, what's important and what's not important, how things happen, and what the controlling rules are. The big thing is that we have at the very peak of the pyramid, the very top of the American legal system, is the Constitution of the United States. Now, each state has a constitution also. Every state was required to have a constitution in order to be part of the United States. So Pennsylvania, you're sitting in Pennsylvania theoretically. Pennsylvania has a constitution. New York has a constitution. Ohio has a constitution, so on and so forth. But we're mostly interested in the federal constitution here, because there's a couple of things that are in the Constitution that are pretty important. One of them is the Supremacy Clause. And I'm not going to go and pull up the Constitution and read the Supremacy Clause to you. You can do that if you want. I do that in business law. But there is something called the Supremacy Clause. And basically what it says is that the Congress of the United States, no, that's not. It says that everything federal is superior to everything else. Now, within the federal umbrella, we've got the Constitution, we've got statutes, and we've got administrative law, and that's the hierarchy of what is most important to least important. The Supremacy Clause says that, if you are talking about state laws or local laws, they're less important than anything that's federal. Okay, so if you have a federal rule of some sort, whether it's the Constitution, whether it's a federal statute, or whether it's a federal administrative rule, they are all superior to anything state or local. As I said, Pennsylvania has a constitution. That is the supreme law of Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Constitution. But the Pennsylvania Constitution is less important in the legal scheme than any federal regulation passed by the Internal Revenue Service, for example. We'll talk about that in a minute. So understand the Supremacy Clause. That's the biggest first step. All right, that being said, I definitely got to get some sleep at night. The Constitution was passed in the late 1700s. It was adopted by the states, the former colonies. Prior to the Constitution, there was something called the Articles of Confederation, which was the common law of the land. It was not a very strong document. It was not a very strong government. And as a result, the United States was floundering as a country. The powers that be, the founding fathers, realized that what they needed was a stronger central government. So they got together and they designed the Constitution of the United States. Constitution of the United States does a few things. Number one, it sets up the legislative branch of the government. So it sets up both the House of Representatives and the Senate of the United States as the lawmaking body of the country. It then sets up the office of the President of the United States, the chief executive of the country. That's the second branch of the government. First is legislative, second is executive, headed by the president. The president's job is to enforce the laws. It's Congress's job to make the laws, and it's the president's job to enforce the laws. Okay, these are the rules. This is how we have to live, and a lot of the mechanisms behind the president exist for the purpose of making sure that the laws are followed. Underneath the president in the executive branch are the agencies the administrative agencies of the federal government. Okay. And I'm going to pick a couple of big ones to talk about the massive administrative agencies, one of which is the Social Security Administration. Okay, so Congress got together, decided that the country needed to have retirement benefits available to people as they got older, to provide medical insurance once you become an elderly person over, say, age 65, to provide disability benefits for somebody who is hurt and not able to work, so that we don't have people that are just starving to death and begging on the streets. That's the Social Security Administration, okay? It was created by the Social Security Act. Now, one of the big things under Social Security is that when you reach retirement age, the government sends you a check every month as your old age benefit, okay? That falls under the Social Security Act, and it falls into the powers of the Social Security Administration. So here's the problem. There's, I don't know how many millions of Americans who are up over retirement age and are receiving their monthly retirement checks from the federal government. Now, Congress passed this law, but I know for a fact that the person who represents me in the House of Representatives and the two senators from Pennsylvania, none of them signed my check. None of them are writing out the retirement check that comes out. I don't get them yet. I'm not retired yet, but none of them are doing any of that physical work. See, what happens is you have the legislative branch that decides, as a country, we should do this. Well, they do that. They pass those rules and create the programs, but then we need to have some method of actually administering the purpose of the statute. Social Security Act, let's create retirement benefits for people. Great. How do you decide who's eligible? I don't know. Should we go back to Congress and ask them? We should, yeah, let's go back. Well, it should be for people who have worked a majority of their lives and reach a certain age, at which point we're going to consider them retired. Okay, what should that age be? Okay, let's make it 65. Okay, so if you work, pay into the plan, at 65, you can retire and we'll give you a check every month for the rest of your life. Okay, how do I apply for these benefits? Do I have to go back to my senator or to my representative and ask them to give me money? No. See, now we get to the point where we have to have administrative law. We have to have people who are actually doing the business of our government. See, our government it governs us. Yes, it passes safety laws, to keep us all safe. It maintains an army and a military force to keep our country secure and strong. And yeah, it does all those things as a country, as a government. But it's also decided that old people should get checks once they retire from their jobs. How do we do that? Well, we're going to have people to do that. So we're going to create an administrative agency. In this case, the Social Security Act created the Social Security Administration. So they're required to carry out the business, the purpose of the statute. Okay. So if you work for Social Security, you may be in the group of people that actually processes the checks and gets the checks out, the payments out to everybody every month. You could be an intake person whose job is to accept the applications for benefits. For God's sake, you could be the person who designed the form that you have to fill out in order to apply for retirement benefits. See, all of that stuff has to happen, and all of that stuff is completely ignored by Congress. That's why we need administrative agencies. Okay, I'm going to switch over to another massive federal agency, the Internal Revenue Service. So the government gets together and says, we need to have money in order to function as a government. We need to tax the people, collect the money from them, and use that to run the government and carry out these programs that we're interested in. All right. What should the tax rate be? Well, Congress will tell us that. Is everybody going to pay the same tax? No, 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 no. We should have different types of tax. You know, if you're single, you should pay tax at a certain rate. If you're married with your spouse, you should pay a certain different rate. If you're head of household, you're unmarried, but you're raising a child, we should have a certain tax rate for you. Let's just make those different tax rates. So Congress does that. They put it into the tax law. Did Congress create the forms? No. Did Congress collect the money, cash the checks when I paid my taxes? No. Who did? Well, the people at the Internal Revenue Service. See, the tax laws in this country are administered by the Internal Revenue Service. So the IRS will eventually decide it's going to they're going to enforce the law. If you should be paying tax, we're going to try and make sure you pay the tax. Okay, it's a voluntary system with the IRS being out here creating forms, taking payments, checking to make sure the math is right on your tax forms, and all those good things. Okay, but what if a dispute arises? Can I depreciate this particular asset? Can I take it as a deduction for business purposes? The IRS is going to say, no, you should pay tax. You shouldn't get that as a deduction. The taxpayer is going to say, no, I should get that as a deduction, so I should pay less tax, right? So they're going to end up in court, and the court is going to say, we find in favor of, pick your choice, the IRS or the taxpayer. If the IRS doesn't like the response, what they're going to do is they're going to pass rules. They're going to say, okay, we had a confusion as to whether this particular asset was able to be depreciated or not. Okay, so if I had a, boy, that's just strange what I'm thinking right now. So there's a question as to how you do depreciation. If you do it one way, it's not deductible. If you do it a different way, it is deductible. So what the IRS will do is they will pass a rule. Now, these rules are called Treasury regulations because the IRS is part of the Treasury Department. But every administrative agency has the right to pass rules to help them administer the act that they were created to administer. So the IRS has the right to pass rules to help them administer the tax code. So they can get together and they can say, okay, we're going to pass this rule, this Treasury regulation that describes the proper method for doing accounting, for doing depreciation. Okay, fine. And now we have a rule that was put out by the IRS. And so if you're a CPA and you're doing taxes for your clients, you now have this help from the IRS as to how to do your job so that you don't get your client in trouble. Oh, the IRS passed a rule and they said that I'm supposed to do it this way, so this is what we have to do. Now, that rule that was passed, the word is promulgated, that rule that was promulgated by the Internal Revenue Service is what's called a regulation, a rule, because it's a Treasury regulation, or it's called an administrative rule. First thing, did any of you vote for the in the last election for the commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service? Do you remember who you voted for in that particular race? You shouldn't, because it's not an elected post. This is somebody who is appointed by the president. What? We've created administrative agencies and we let the president appoint the head of that agency, and he has the right to make rules for that agency in how they're going to administer the law. Yes. And that rule, that regulation, is going to have the same effect as if it was a law that was passed by Congress. Yes. So basically, you're telling me, what I'm saying is that regulators in administrative offices have the ability, the right, the authority to pass rules which have the effect of law, basically the same power as a statute, and they are more important than any state law. Kind of scary. Don't particularly like it. We have this, three houses of branches of government, because we have this separation of powers because we don't trust anybody. But no, we're just going to let these administrative agencies, people that are appointed by the president, make law. We never voted for them. Interesting. So that's the backdrop where we are. When we talk about employment law, we've got the big laws out there, the Federal Labor Standards Act, which is controlled by the Department of Labor, who has the right to make regulations with regard to this law. And state laws, unimportant. So this is an area where knowing the federal law is probably the most important part. Change my screen. Come back to where I see you guys. All right, so any questions so far? Do we need to go back through any more of the legislative or governmental backdrop or background? Okay, we know that we have the Constitution, the highest law in the land. We've got statutes that are passed by Congress that are next highest, right underneath the Constitution. And then we have rules and regulations from federal agencies that are next in our level of importance. So, all right. I think it's time to start looking at the book. Let's look at chapter 22 here, which is where I said we were going to start. The federal wage and hour law. All right, the Federal Labor Standards Act, first enacted in 1938, where they tried to create a law that created a minimum wage. Now, for those of you that have had me before, and even for those of you that haven't had me before, one of the things that I like to talk about when I talk about laws, I like to talk about history. You need to look at what is going on in history when we have major changes or major advances in the law. 1938, what's going on? What's going on in 1938 in the United States? Marlon, what do you think? I put everybody to sleep, didn't I? Anybody? My computer frozen up? Are you guys still there? Colton, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I can hear you.
Okay, good. For a while there, I was thinking I was all alone. Colton, I'll stay with I called on you. What's going on in the country in 1938?
Like World War II?
Well, just prior to World War II. We entered the war in 1941. The war actually starts in 1939, 1940-ish. But what's going on in the United States in 1938?
Don't know.
Anybody? The Great Depression. We have Autumn Wanchuk texting us. That's right. It's the Great Depression. Okay, so we have a lot of people out of work. We have an economy that is really sluggish and not recovering. We have a lot of bad things going on in the country. And so we had a lot of, at the time, we have President Franklin Roosevelt as the president. And he is a president who is trying to expand the powers of the federal government so that the government can start taking over greater parts of everybody's lives. Now, I don't say that to be snarky and to say it was a bad thing. It was probably a very good thing, but this is an initial entry into the labor market, if you will, of President Roosevelt and his New Deal policies. Hey, let's try and fix this economy. We've got really bad things going on. How can we make the average worker's life better? Well, minimum wage was one of the things that they talked about. Let's set a minimum wage. The issue of minimum wage remains the subject of current public political campaign regarding the plight of low-paid workers. When this book was published, I think President was Obama. Obama had called for a raise in a minimum wage to $10.10. What's the minimum wage in the United States right now? Anybody know? Holly, what do you think?
Isn't it still like $7.25?
Yep, $7.25. So if you are employed, your employer is required to pay you minimum wage. So no less than $7.25 an hour. Now, just to show my age, when I started working when I was 16, minimum wage was $1.65 an hour. And if you talk to any of the experts out there, they're saying that the 725 has been at 725 for way too long. It should have gone up years ago. So back when I started working, it was $1.65 an hour. Now it's 725. Now, you can argue, you know, whenever you have any kind of a legislation that's out there in front of you, you can argue the policy. Should the government do something about this? Should the government act? Should the government not act? Okay, so let's talk about the minimum wage and $7.25 an hour. If the government were to say raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, what would be the likely result of raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour? Natalie, what do you think? Andre, I saw you wanted to jump in there. What you got?
I kind of think like prices on a lot of goods and stuff like that will probably go up if the minimum wage goes up.
Yeah, because a lot of industries rely on lower paid employees to keep the price of their product low, right? I think you take a look at McDonald's. You have people that are working for very small amounts of money. If they were to double or double plus minimum wage, is the price of the Big Mac going to go up? Very likely. Do you think that we would have as many employees? Stay with Andre. What do you think?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that what would happen is you would end up with, you know, I haven't been to a McDonald's in a little while. I'm stuck in this damn hotel, but I get to go to the hospital. But I know that at the McDonald's near my home, they put in these kiosks in the lobby, and I don't spend a lot of time in McDonald's lobbies or anything anymore. But I can do my order without talking to the person at the counter. I can go to the kiosk and I can put in my order, put in my credit card, and then just go over and wait for my food. So obviously, if it becomes cheaper for the companies to buy technology than it is to pay their employees to stand and do basically the same job, what you'll see is companies buying into technology and getting rid of workers. Okay. Now, the other thing is, let's talk about minimum wage. What's the real policy behind minimum wage? Who are we trying to protect with minimum wage? Ashley, what do you think? Who are we trying to protect?
I have no idea. Maybe upper class.
The rich, the rich.
Well, who should benefit from the minimum wage?
People with no experience or low education.
True. Those are the people who, and Colton, you got me right exactly where I wanted to go, is who is actually working for minimum wage out there. So, okay, you've got people that have no experience or no education, right? Who else works out there at minimum wage?
A lot of the times it's like high school students in their first job.
That's exactly right. So the people that you see out there in this minimum wage world that we have are really two different groups of people. You've got the teenagers that are, probably in high school that are making money to either to save up for college or to buy that car or for beer money or whatever. And you've got the people who have not improved their desirability in the employee workforce, but they're not necessarily high school kids that are theoretically going to be improving into other things as we move forward. You've got the people who are trapped there for the rest of their life. So some people have argued that there should be like a dual minimum wage out there, that high school kids should be $7.25, but people who need to raise a family should be $15 or something like that. I don't know how you administer that properly. I don't know how you would do that, but that becomes the issue. Who you're trying to protect with this law? What's the policy? I think really, before you can set a number, you really have to decide who it is that you're trying to benefit or protect here. And I think that's an issue, a problem with minimum wage. All right. Da, 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 da. All right, so as I said, we have a history here where we had basically during the Franklin Roosevelt administration prior to World War II, we had him trying to do a lot of social programs to try and improve the lives of people during the Great Depression. Now, that's not much. We don't really think much of that today. Think about, if you can remember back to 2008, the Great Recession, where we had the financial meltdown where the banking and the finance industry almost collapsed because of abuses that they were engaged in. And the government had no problem just taking tons of money and bailing out banks and investment companies and insurance companies and hedge funds and things like that. The automakers were bailed out at that time too. The government at this point has no difficulty saying, oh, we need to throw some stimulus money into the economy because everything's falling apart. That was not the thought process back in the 1930s. So everything that you read about with the advent of a minimum wage or Medicare or Social Security or things like that coming into being, these were major changes in thought process. Nobody ever thought about the government setting these programs up to benefit people like this. The world was a much harsher place. If you lost your job, you lost your job. There was no such thing as unemployment benefits or unemployment insurance. So you have the economy going into the tank at the beginning of the Great Recession, and what you end up with is, and I have no idea if Giannini talks about this in his economics class, but you had a spiral that got created. You've got this economy that's out here, and it's this really nice, great economy, and then something happens to make it start doubting itself. So you have companies that go, I don't know, I don't have a lot of confidence in the economy. I'm not going to spend that money to buy the new equipment. I'm just going to I'm going to stand pat right now. Well, the company that sells that equipment that would need that the company should be buying to modernize, they now have no business. So they have to start laying off or firing their employees. Sorry, guys, no work, you're fired. Well, those people now can't afford to buy food or pay their rent or pay their car payment or whatever. So, you know, the people that they would have spent their money to, those companies have to let employees go. And then those people affected other companies and they had to fire people, and on it went. It became this spiral and the economy kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller, because as people would lose their jobs, they would lose the ability to spend, and therefore they would affect more people, which caused the economy to keep constricting. It went into this inward spiral that just caused the economy to collapse. That was the Great Depression. Okay, I could talk, you know, 100 hours about what the causes were, but those were the effects. In today's world, we have what we refer to as economic safety nets. So, for example, we have unemployment insurance or unemployment benefits, depending on how you want to look at it. So unemployment benefits means that if I lose my job through no fault of my own, I will be receiving money from the government for a period of time. And so that theoretically will give me the ability to keep spending money, to keep putting food on the table, to keep making my house payment, to keep make my car payment, whatever, but at least I'm not completely broke. So it keeps the economy from contracting as harshly as it did back during the Great Depression. Another one of those things is Social Security. It's another safety net that's out there. Workers' compensation is another safety net where we provide money to people who are not working or cannot work as a benefit so that they can continue their lives. You know, you can sit back and say, boy, you know, the government, they're really nice people. We worry about the poor. We worry about the unemployed, and we're going to take care of them. We're going to create these benefits for them. Well, yeah, that's out there, but you know, the reality of it is it's out there as a safety net. If they all of a sudden lose the ability to spend money, then the economy goes into the toilet. We want to have people that are no longer working still have the ability to pay and keep the economy moving. Okay, it's the grease that keeps the wheels moving. But anyhow, in 1938, not so much. So if you take a look at the history that was going on back here, we have a number of court cases. We have the National Industrial Recovery Act passed in 1933 to improve general conditions during the Great Depression. It provided codes of fair competition for various industries, developed trade associations within each industry, specify minimum wages by the president. The codes would have the force of law. The Supreme Court deemed that to be unconstitutional. An unconstitutional delegation of power in 1935 under the Schechter-Poultry case versus the United States. 36, Walsh-Healy Act was passed, regulating working conditions for government contractors, set minimum standards and wages for contractors providing at least $10,000 worth of goods to the federal government. However, this particular law stayed in effect. Why? Because it didn't have widespread applicability. It only applied to people who dealt with the federal government. So that was not considered to be an overly broad thing. So, oh, you want to deal with the government, we have the right to say how you run your company. So that was the first step forward in legislation to control employment. 1937, the Supreme Court was presented with a case that challenged the legality of a Washington state law that set a minimum wage for women. In several prior cases, the court had held that minimum wage laws were unconstitutional, just as it had done to the National Industrial Recovery Act. This is West Coast Hotel versus Parrish. This is in the United States Superior Court hearing a case about a Washington minimum wage law. The argument here was could the state set a minimum wage for women? Now, this is an important part of the case, that they made the minimum wage only applicable to women. Okay. Decision. The court explained the principle that must control its decision was due process clause, which effect applies to due process clause of the Fifth Amendment. Due process violations alleged by those attacking minimum wage regulations for women was deprivation of freedom of contract. What is freedom? So what the argument here against minimum wage was that women should have the right to contract at whatever wage they want. There shouldn't be a minimum wage that's set. And therefore, this was harmful to women because it prevented them from taking jobs that paid less than whatever the minimum wage was under this particular law. The court went on to ask rhetorically, what can be closer to the public interest than the health of women and their protection from unscrupulous and overreaching employers? The answer was that the protection of women is a legitimate goal to the exercise of state power. The legislature of the state was clearly entitled to consider the situation of women in employment, the fact that they are the class receiving the least pay and their bargaining power is the most weak. They are ready victims. The legislature was entitled to adopt measures to reduce the evils of the sweating system, the exploitation of workers at wages so low as to be insufficient to meet the bare cost of living, thus making their very helplessness the occasion of most injurious competition. The feeling that such a radical in the eyes of conservatives decisions required a belt and suspenders argument, the majority added an additional compelling and consideration, which they said recent economic experience, that is the Great Depression, had brought into a strong light. The exploitation of a class of workers who are in an unequal position with respect to bargaining power and are thus relatively defenseless against the denial of a living wage is not only detrimental to the health and well-being, excuse me, but casts a direct burden for their support on the community. What these workers lose in wages, the employers were called upon to pay through public assistance, at that time called the dole. The majority opinion ended by overruling an earlier case that had held minimum wage laws violated due process and were therefore unconstitutional. So you can see that there's a history to how we get to where we are today. We end up, all of this is going to have its roots in the Great Depression and in the progressive leadership of the Roosevelt administration trying to bring the country out of the Great Depression, trying to create social programs, trying to create benefits and rights for certain workers. Okay. The interesting thing here is that if, in my opinion, if this particular case would have been brought up on a federal statute, I believe the court would have overruled it. The reason that the Supreme Court let this particular law stand is because it came from the state of Washington, not from Washington, D.C. And once again, we talk about how the government is structured. We have the federal government that controls a lot of things. It is theoretically a government of enumerated powers. So if you look in Article 1, Section 8, there is a list of what the federal government is allowed to do, with the wording at the end of Section 8 saying any rights not specifically given hereby to the federal government are reserved to either the states or to the people themselves. So that means that the states have what are called police powers for the welfare and well-being of their citizens. And therefore, this was brought up as a law that was supposed to try and create a general welfare for the women of the state of Washington. If this was a federal case, they lose. This was not brought up under the enumerated powers of the Congress, but it was brought up under the state's police powers for health and well-being and welfare. As a result, it was allowed to stay. And then that was the first chink in the armor where we start having the ability for states, at least, to start passing laws with regard to employment. Understand, prior to this point in history, you had the early 1900s, the 1900s, the 1910s, the 1920s, where you had the massive mega millionaires, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Morgans, the people like that who had huge empires in industry. These people were the backbone of the economy of the United States. The United States government and the United States court system did not want to interfere with their ability to grow the economy of the United States. So therefore, any court decision prior to these 1930s decisions that you're seeing would always have gone in favor of big business, because big business was considered to be good for the country. The courts didn't want to get in the way. Congress didn't want to get in the way. Why 1936, 1937 do we have this happening? Was big business good for the United States anymore? We're in the middle of a massive depression. Those billionaires, millionaires were still living pretty good, but not everybody else, right? So you see a change in the thought process in the government, in the courts, reflecting the change in society. Okay, so always pay attention to that. Whenever we talk about a law, look and see when it occurred. What was going on then? Was it the Depression? Was it World War II? Was it the Civil War? We'll talk about laws that come out of there, or Reconstruction after the Civil War. All right, that's all I have for today. We got through a lot of material. I'm happy with everything we got through. Anybody have any questions? All right, if there's no questions, then we will meet together on Thursday. We will be meeting again via Zoom. And as I think I said before, the Zoom invitation that you have, I set this up as a recurring meeting, so it should be all that is necessary to get back into the Zoom class on Thursday at 2:30. So have a great day, everybody. We'll see you on Thursday.